Captain Raynar Ironclad Vale leaned back in his grimy chair, the one with the suspicious stains that might have been there longer than any crew member. "So," he said, adjusting his cap with a smirk that could cut glass, "who's ready to risk their sorry hides for a chance at a big payday?" His eyes flicked up, catching the mismatched gazes of his crew. First up was Carr, the brawny engineer whose muscles had muscles. He was currently using a spanner in ways it was never designed to be used, probably voiding several warranties in the process. "What, like last time, when we almost got spaced because someone couldn't tell a cargo hold from a black hole," Carr grumbled, and the spanner made a particularly unpleasant noise. "Hey, that was a learning experience," Lyra piped up from her console, flicking her multicolored braids over her shoulder. "We learned not to trust you with directions, Carr." She threw a wink at Vale, who nodded solemnly. "And what did we learn about trusting Lyra with the navigation systems?" Vale countered, arching an eyebrow with dangerous ease. "Oh right, we learned not to." "This time's different," Vale insisted, holding up a hand to forestall further sniping. "We've got intel on a planetary shield wall that's about to fail, and behind it a so-called alien simulation that's been messing with every spacefaring species in the quadrant. A virtual amusement park of unfathomable stupidity, locked away for eons." "Unfathomable stupidity is right," muttered Trix, the pilot who never met a cynicism he didn't like. He lounged in his chair as if he were part of it, a living embodiment of apathy. "Why should we care?" "Because, why says when that shield drops, there'll be tech worth more than this rust bucket," Vale replied, patting the ship's console affectionately, or as affectionately as one could when it was primarily held together by duct tape and good intentions. "And we, my friends, are going to be first to cash in," Carr sighed, tossing the spanner aside with a clatter. "Assuming we don't get turned into space dust first." "That's the spirit," Vale said, grinning. "I'll put it on your tombstone. He died as he lived, grumbling about impending doom." There was a pause in the banter, a sinister silence filled by the hum of failing systems and the distant, ominous clunks of something mechanical disagreeing with physics. "How do we know this intel isn't another setup?" asked Arla, the crew's medic, who was currently rifling through a medkit with the same enthusiasm a tax auditor approaches a stack of receipts. "Well, it came from Goro," Vale mused. "Goro, the one who swore he found an ancient relic last time and it turned out to be his grandmother's toaster. That Goro?" Lyra asked, deadpan. "The same," Vale admitted. "But I have it on good authority he was sober when he got this info." "That man hasn't been sober a day in his life," Trix muttered. "A fact that makes his tips all the more interesting," Vale replied, leaning forward. "What do you think, crew? Do we take the chance or do we sit here till the rust eats us alive?" "Rust or riches," mumbled Carr. "Hell, why not? Better than dying of boredom." "Exactly," Vale said, clapping his hands together with a noise that suggested the room might fall apart at any moment. "Let's get to it then. Lyra, punch in the coordinates. Trix, try not to crash us into anything. Carr, make sure the engines don't explode, and Arla, get ready to patch us up when everything inevitably goes wrong." With tasks assigned, the crew moved with something resembling enthusiasm, or at least a lack of overt despair, which was about as good as one could hope for on the Ironclad these days. The ship was a relic from a bygone era, patched together from outdated technology and sheer desperation. Beautiful if you squinted real hard and had a soft spot for lost causes. As they slipped into the void, Vale couldn't help but wonder if this was the big break he'd been waiting for, or just another wild goose chase in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space. He chose not to dwell on it, preferring instead to focus on the comforting hum of the engines and the occasional spark from the control panel. "What's the worst that could happen?" he muttered to himself, a phrase that had become something of a mantra. Unfortunately, in his experience, it was the kind of question that usually invited the universe to come up with creative answers. "Captain," Lyra called from her console, "we're approaching the coordinates. And you're gonna want to see this." Vale sauntered over, peering over her shoulder at the display. "Huh," he said, scratching his chin. "Looks like Goro wasn't lying after all. That is one hell of a light show." The shield wall was visible even from a distance, a shimmering bubble of energy surrounding the planet like a protective mother hen, albeit one that looked like it was about to drop dead from exhaustion. "That's a big wall," Trix commented, eyes wide. "Bigger than your ego, Cap." "Nothing's that big," Vale replied without missing a beat. "Lyra, take us in closer. Let's see if we can find a way through without getting vaporized." "Aye, Captain," Lyra said, fingers dancing over the console like a pianist with a death wish. As they approached, the scope of the simulation became clearer. Glitches in the shield flickered like lightning storms, a cosmic spin of roulette with their lives as the bet. "I don't like this," Arla remarked, frowning at the erratic readings on her screen. "This kind of tech usually comes with a serious case of deadliness." "Good thing we're not usually," Vale noted. "We're occasionally, and occasionally is good enough for me." A sudden jolt rocked the ship, sending everyone scrambling for support. "What the hell was that?" Carr shouted, scrambling to check the systems. "Looks like the shield's having a bad day," Lyra said, her expression glued to the monitors. "We've got an opening, but it's not gonna stay that way for long." "Then let's not keep it waiting," Vale ordered. "Trix, take us in. And if you scratch the paint, you're cleaning it." "With what, my tears?" Trix shot back. Nevertheless, he eased the ship forward, threading them through the chaotic energy field with the kind of precision that only a pilot who'd narrowly escaped death more times than was reasonable could muster. The inside of the shield was a different world. The planet spread out beneath them, a lush paradise untouched by the ravages of time or war. And in the middle of it all, like a malignant tumor in paradise, was the simulation hub, a monstrous construct of alien design, clicking and whirring with a life of its own. "That doesn't look sinister at all," Arla said dryly. "I especially like the ominous black towers." "Very inviting." "Let's set her down," Vale said, his voice calm and steady. "And remember, we're here for the tech, not to make friends, so try not to shoot anything you don't have to." "No promises," Carr muttered, checking his weapon. The ship touched down with an ungraceful thump, the landing gear groaning in protest. They disembarked, stepping onto the surface with a mix of awe and trepidation. "All right, people," Vale said, looking around. "Let's get what we came for and get out before the neighbors decide to drop by." As they moved toward the simulation hub, the air crackled with a strange, almost tangible tension. It was the kind of atmosphere that promised either spectacular winnings or catastrophic failure, and Vale couldn't help but feel a thrill at the thought. "Captain," Lyra said, her voice low and serious for once, "I'm getting some weird readings, these signals. They might be some kind of communication network." "Communication with who?" Vale asked, but before Lyra could answer, the ground beneath them began to shake. "I think we're about to find out," Arla said, her voice tinged with the kind of grim humor that comes when you're staring down the barrel of the unknown. And then, with a noise like the universe being torn asunder, the hub flared to life, casting a sickly green glow over the landscape. Shadows danced and twisted as if mocking the intruders. "Well, shit," Vale said, drawing his weapon. "Looks like Goro's tip just got a whole lot more interesting." The crew spread out, weapons ready, as the hub began to pulse with an energy that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The air hummed with potential, and as the first alien figures began to materialize from the glow, Vale realized that this was going to be one hell of a payday, assuming they lived long enough to collect. "Welcome to the end of the world," he muttered, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Let the games begin." As the simulation hub flared to life, the crew of the Ironclad stood poised like reluctant heroes in a badly scripted holodrama. Captain Vale, ever the optimist when it came to gambling with his life, gave a nod towards the glowing monstrosity towering over them. It was the kind of nod that said, "Well, we're screwed, but let's make it interesting." "All right," Vale began, his voice laced with the kind of faux enthusiasm that comes from years of pretending the ship wasn't one bad day away from total collapse. Let's see what fun surprises this alien amusement park has in store for us. Surprises. You mean like free dismemberment or complimentary vaporization? Carr grumbled, hefting his tool-turned weapon with the same care a mother cat reserves for her kittens. Hey, freeze free, Trix said, shrugging. We could use a change of pace from our usual almost dying in a vacuum accident. Arla, ever the beacon of cheer, snorted. You realize we're probably the equivalent of space rodents in whatever game this is, right? How long before the exterminator shows up? Not long, Lyra replied, peering at her handheld scanner like it had personally offended her. I'm picking up movement. Looks like an alien patrol on the way. And let me tell you, they don't look like they're here for peace talks. So, plan? Arla asked, casually loading her sidearm as if calibrating a medical scanner. Our usual, Vale said, with a grin that teetered on the edge of sanity. Improvise, adapt, and if all else fails, run like hell. That's the strategy that got us here, Trix pointed out, with the kind of sardonic tone that implied he was both impressed and horrified. Exactly, Vale said, starting forward, the rest of the crew falling into step behind him. The ground beneath their feet vibrated with the hum of alien machinery, an omnipresent reminder that they were very much the intruders here. As they approached the entrance to the simulation hub, a strange, rhythmic clicking echoed through the air, like the chatter of 1,000 malevolent typewriters. Sounds like they're rolling out the welcome mat, Carr muttered. Yeah, Vale said, leaning against a metal outcropping for cover as the patrol came into view. They were tall, lanky things, with limbs that bent in too many places and eyes that glowed with an unsettling intensity. Whatever we do, let's not end up on the wrong end of those party favors they're carrying. Suggestions? Lyra asked, keeping her voice low. Well, Vale said, considering their options or lack thereof, we could try the classic duck, dodge, and distract maneuver. Is that the technical term? Trix asked, one eyebrow arched. It's a Vale original, the captain said with a wink. Lyra, see if you can create a diversion. Carr, you're with me. Arla, Trix, you get to be our eyes in the sky. Lovely, Arla said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she and Trix moved to higher ground. Scouting duty, my favorite. No pressure, Lyra said, her fingers already flying over her portable console. But if this doesn't work, we might want to try Plan B. Which is? Vale asked. See how fast we can run while screaming, Lyra replied, not looking up. The alien patrol was getting closer, their movements eerily synchronized, as if coordinated by some hive mind. Now or never, Lyra, Vale urged. Here goes nothing, Lyra muttered, tapping a final command into her device. A moment later, the air was filled with a cacophony of sounds, a bizarre blend of distress calls, engine roars, and what sounded suspiciously like the synthesized wailing of some long-extinct alien species. The patrol halted, their heads swiveling towards the source of the noise with all the grace of malfunctioning automatons. Move, Vale hissed, motioning for Carr to follow him as they skirted the patrol, slipping through the narrow gap between alien bodies and the looming structure. Remind me again why we never just shoot first and ask questions later, Carr whispered as they crept along. Because we're not psychopaths, Vale replied, not entirely convincingly. And besides, ammo's expensive. They rounded a corner and found themselves at a service entrance to the hub, a heavy door locked tight with a panel boasting far too many buttons for comfort. Think you can get us in? Vale asked, nodding towards the door. Carr examined the panel with the air of a surgeon facing a particularly persistent tumor. Probably. But if I screw it up, this thing might blow up in our faces. Story of my life, Vale said, stepping back. Give it a go. Carr set to work, his hands moving with a deftness that belied his gruff exterior. Keep an eye on our friends back there, he said, nodding towards the still distracted patrol. Vale glanced back, noting that the aliens seemed confused but not entirely deterred. They're still interested in whatever Lyra cooked up, but I wouldn't count on it holding their attention forever. Good to know, Carr said, his voice strained as he coaxed the panel into compliance. With a final, triumphant beep, the door slid open with a hiss of released air. And we're in, Carr said, sounding almost surprised at his own success. Nice work, Vale said, clapping him on the shoulder. Let's see what kind of treasure trove this place is hiding. Inside, the hub was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each more disorienting than the last. The walls pulsed with a sickly green light, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed like living things. Definitely not creepy at all, Vale muttered as they moved deeper into the structure. As they navigated the maze, the sound of alien voices echoed around them, a guttural, unsettling language that seemed to vibrate in their bones. Looks like we've got company, Carr said, his grip tightening on his tool-turned weapon. Time for a bit of subterfuge, Vale said, his mind racing as he considered their options. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, filled with alien machinery that hummed with a low, insistent energy. This looks important, Carr commented, eyeing the equipment with equal parts awe and suspicion. Let's find out just how important, Vale said, moving towards the nearest console. As he worked, the alien voices grew louder, and it was clear they were closing in. We're on a timer, Carr reminded him, a note of urgency creeping into his voice. Almost there, Vale said, his fingers dancing over the controls, bypassing layers of security with a skill born of necessity and a healthy disregard for personal safety. Suddenly, the room was filled with a blaring alarm, the lights flashing red in time with the wailing siren. Well, that's subtle, Carr said dryly. Time to go, Vale said, abandoning the console and sprinting for the exit, Carr hot on his heels. They barreled through the corridors, the sound of pursuit growing ever closer. Lyra, Arla, Trix, Vale barked into his comm, were coming out hot. Be ready for extraction. Great, Arla replied, her voice crackling over the comm. And here I thought we might get a peaceful retreat for once. Where's the fun in that? Vale said, skidding around a corner and nearly colliding with an alien patrol member. The alien recoiled, its weapon raising with lethal intent. Carr was faster, swinging his makeshift weapon with a force that sent the alien sprawling. Move, he shouted, pulling Vale along. They burst out of the hub into daylight, the ship's engines already whining as Trix prepared for a hasty takeoff. Get on board now, Trix yelled, his voice carrying over the din of the engines and the alien alarms. Vale and Carr piled into the ship, and the ramp sealed shut behind them with a reassuring thud. Go, 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 Vale shouted, stumbling into the cockpit as Trix lifted off. The ship shot upwards, the ground falling away as Trix piloted them through a dizzying series of maneuvers that left Vale white-knuckled and trying not to ruin the upholstery with his breakfast. Smooth flying as always, Trix, Vale managed to say, his voice only slightly strained. Just another day at the office, Trix replied, a hint of a grin in his voice. As they broke free of the planet's atmosphere and the relative safety of space enveloped them once more, Vale allowed himself a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Well, that was educational. Educational, Carr repeated, shaking his head. That was insane. Same thing, really, Vale said with a shrug. Captain, Lyra said, her voice drawing their attention. I think we've got a bigger problem. Vale turned to see her holding a data pad, the screen displaying a series of rapidly scrolling symbols. What now? He asked, feeling his earlier optimism beginning to fray at the edges. Those readings I picked up earlier, Lyra said, tapping the pad for emphasis. Looks like they've taken an interest in us. Whoever's running this simulation just upgraded us from nuisance to problem. Great, Vale said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I always wanted to be a problem. What now, Captain? Arla asked, her tone suggesting that she was already bracing for whatever madcap plan Vale might come up with next. We improvise, Vale said, a grin spreading across his face despite it all. Let's see how they handle a problem that doesn't play by the rules. And if they don't, Trix asked, his voice as nonchalant as ever. Then we make up new ones, Vale replied. After all, if we're gonna be a thorn in their side, we might as well dig in deep. As the crew settled into their roles, ready to face whatever came next, Vale couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating on little more than bravado and caffeine, but they were human. And if there was one thing humans did best, it was defying expectations, even if it meant getting themselves into the kind of trouble that would make a lesser species curl up and weep. "All right, crew," Vale said, settling into his chair. "Let's give them a show they won't forget." And with that, the ironclad streaked through the stars, a battered testament to human tenacity and the undeniable allure of the impossible. The ironclad cruised through the simulation's airspace, a battered tin can with dreams of being a bullet. Inside, the crew tried to remember why they hadn't given up and become space accountants. "Anyone else wondering what's next in this cosmic circus?" Trix asked, as he fiddled with the ship's controls like they were a particularly tricky puzzle box. "Let me guess," Lyra chimed in, a giant clown head floating towards us, honking menacingly. "Please, no clowns," Arla said, shuddering. "I draw the line at clowns." Vale tilted his head back, looking at the ceiling as if answers might be scribbled there. "Well, we've survived a long-extinct species' greatest hits and annoyed some aliens. What could possibly be worse?" Famous last words, Carr muttered, his tool-turned weapon handy as ever. Suddenly, the ship lurched as if they'd hit an asteroid the size of their collective egos. Consoles blinked erratically, and the main display flickered to life with an array of shapes and colors that would make a kaleidoscope seethe with envy. "What's that?" Arla asked, leaning in to examine the chaotic screen. "Looks like the universe threw up on our display," Vale decided, squinting at the psychedelic mess. "Hang on," Lyra said, furiously tapping at her handheld scanner. "This isn't random, it's a maze," Vale groaned. "A maze." "What are we, lab rats now? More like lab cockroaches," Trix suggested, "tough to kill and always scuttling around places we shouldn't be." "Charming," Vale replied. "All right, let's navigate this thing. And remember, if we hit a dead end, we're improvising." "By improvising, you mean screaming and running in circles, right?" Carr deadpanned. "Works every time," Vale assured him. Trix angled the ship into the maze, the walls closing in with threatening proximity. It was like flying through a funhouse designed by someone with a deep resentment for straight lines and an unhealthy obsession with right angles. "Left or right, Captain?" Trix asked, eyeing a fork in the path. "Flip a coin," Vale said. "Because making informed decisions is for people with actual plans." "Right it is," Trix decided, steering them into the unknown. The maze was a whirlwind of unexpected turns and dead ends, each more ludicrous than the last. Alarms blared whenever they veered too close to a wall, which was often, given their lack of a coherent strategy. "This isn't a maze," Arla observed. "It's an IQ test for the terminally insane." "Good thing we qualify," Lyra said, not looking up from her scanner. Meanwhile, in some hidden control room, their antics were being monitored by beings with more eyes than patience. The aliens watched in growing frustration as their carefully crafted simulation was reduced to a series of unpredictable blunders. "Update, I think we've confused them," Lyra noted, chuckling grimly. "About time we weaponized incompetence," Carr said, admiration in his voice. The ship suddenly shuddered again, the display flickering to reveal a new layout, one with even less logic than before. "Are they changing the maze on us?" Arla asked, incredulous. "Looks like they're trying to outwit us," Vale replied, grinning. "Good luck with that. If they think moving the walls will help, they are in for a disappointment," Trix added. "We barely noticed them in the first place." Vale nodded. "Keep at it, crew. Remember, if they're confused, we're doing something right." They pressed on, ignoring all semblance of a coherent strategy. The ironclad weaved through the maze, its path dictated by whimsy as much as necessity. And slowly they felt the aliens' grip loosening, their ability to adapt strained by human unpredictability. "Captain, I'm picking up another distortion," Lyra warned. "Of course you are," Vale said, rolling his eyes. Okay, brace for whatever fresh hell this is. The ship emerged into a vast chamber filled with floating platforms, each one spinning lazily in the zero-gravity environment. Oh good, Carr said, feigning enthusiasm. A jumping puzzle, just what I needed to complete my day. Looks like they want us to play hopscotch, Trix observed, his sarcasm as thick as ever. Well, we're not getting any younger, Vale said, unbuckling and standing up. Who's up for a little Eva? Thought you'd never ask, Carr said, joining him at the airlock. Everyone's got a grappling hook, right? Vale asked, glancing around. Always prepared for impromptu space shenanigans, Arla confirmed, securing her gear. The airlock hissed open, and they stepped out onto the first platform, their boots thudding softly in the unnatural silence. The platforms bobbed under their weight, swaying with a rhythmic unpredictability that did nothing for their confidence. Remember, people, Vale said, don't look down. Thanks for the tip, Captain Obvious, Trix replied, eyeing a particularly distant platform. They moved with the coordination of a group of drunks navigating a pitch-black room, leaping from platform to platform with varying degrees of grace. The aliens, meanwhile, scrambled to adjust to the new layers of chaos humans introduced to their orderly simulation. Why do I feel like we're the proverbial bull in a china shop? Arla asked as she landed awkwardly on a platform. Because we are, Carr replied, holding himself up beside her. A very ugly china shop. Next time, can we find a simulation with a bar? Trix suggested. I could use a drink. I'll make a note, Vale promised, eyeing their next jump. But for now, let's try not to fall into the void, all right. As they moved, the platforms began to shift more rapidly, as if trying to shake them off like fleas from a dog. The simulation was clearly struggling to maintain its composure. Looks like they're getting desperate, Lyra commented, watching the platforms spin faster with every leap. Great, Vale said. Let's keep pushing their buttons. They reached the end of the chamber, facing a massive door that loomed ominously. It was locked, naturally, with a console beside it that blinked in a way that suggested it was not user-friendly. Who's got the magic touch? Vale asked, gesturing at the console. Lyra stepped forward, her fingers dancing over the controls with a confidence born of necessity. Give me a minute, she said, frowning at the stubborn interface. You've got 30 seconds, Trix said, watching the platforms with growing suspicion. I don't trust those things to stay put. Never do, Carr advised, keeping an eye on their surroundings. With a final, triumphant beep, the door slid open, revealing another corridor lined with more of that sickly green light. And we're in, Lyra said, satisfied. Let's not wait for the welcome party, Vale suggested, leading them through. They hurried down the corridor, the sound of alien machinery humming ominously in the background. Once again, their presence was noted, and alarms began to wail, lights flashing with a dazzling array of colors that would make even disco enthusiasts beg for mercy. Subtle as always, Carr said, picking up the pace. This way, Vale said, choosing a path at random because why not? Logic hadn't done them any favors yet. The corridor twisted and turned, seemingly endless in its attempts to disorient them. They followed it with the single-minded determination of people who were completely out of their depth but too stubborn to admit it. Captain, Lyra called out, stopping suddenly. We've got another problem. Just one, Vale asked, turning back. That's a nice change. Lyra pointed at her scanner, the screen showing a jumble of symbols that made no sense to Vale. This place is trying to lock us in. Fantastic, Trix said. I always wanted to become a permanent exhibit. Can you override it? Vale asked. Working on it, Lyra replied, already tapping away. As she worked, the corridor began to close in, the walls inching closer with a grinding noise that set everyone's teeth on edge. Anytime now, Lyra, Arla said, watching the walls with growing concern. Almost there, she promised, her focus unwavering. The walls crept nearer, their threat more tangible with each passing second. Finally, Lyra let out a triumphant laugh. Got it, the walls stopped, then slowly retracted, leaving them with a clear path once more. Good job, Vale said, relieved. Let's get moving before they change their minds. They pressed on, the corridor eventually opening into another chamber filled with alien machinery. The equipment hummed with a sinister energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. "Looks like we've found the brain," Carr said, eyeing the machines. "Then let's lobotomize it," Vale decided, moving towards the controls. As they fiddled with the machinery, the hum grew louder, the simulation shuddering as if in protest. "Feels like we're poking a wounded beast," Arla commented, keeping a wary eye on the exits. "Good," Vale said. "Maybe it'll bleed." Their interference finally reached a tipping point, and the air filled with the sound of systems failing. Lights flickered, alarms sputtered, and the floor beneath their feet vibrated with a rhythmic intensity. "Time to go," Trix shouted, already heading for the exit. They raced back the way they'd come, the simulation's integrity unraveling behind them. The walls shook and pieces of the ceiling began to fall, the entire structure convulsing like a dying beast. "Lyra, get us a clear path," Vale barked as they ran. "Working on it," she replied, fingers flying over her scanner. As they reached the ship, Trix was already preparing for takeoff, the engines whining in anticipation. "Get aboard," he yelled as the last of the crew stumbled inside, breathless but alive. The ironclad surged upwards, the ground disappearing beneath them as they shot into the safety of space once more. The simulation crumbled below, a testament to the chaos humans could unleash with a little incompetence and a lot of courage. "Looks like we made it," Arla said, collapsing into a chair. "Made it out," Carr corrected. "Not sure if we made it anywhere." "Same difference," Vale said, relaxing in his seat. "Let's see those aliens deal with that mess. And if they come after us again?" Lyra asked, looking at Vale. He grinned, that sharp smirk of his cutting through the tension. "Then we'll do what we do best. Improvise, adapt, and run like hell," Trix suggested, setting a course for parts unknown. "Exactly," Vale said, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the madness. As the ironclad zipped away, leaving the simulation in ruins, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned, and still running by the seat of their pants, but they'd proven one thing. Humans were a problem that even the best simulations couldn't quite handle. And for now, that was enough. The ironclad hummed along through space, barely intact after their impromptu remodeling of the alien simulation hub. Captain Raynar Ironclad Vale leaned back in his chair, his smirk etched firmly on his face as he surveyed the crew. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his ragtag bunch, and they'd done the impossible again. Now, it was time to figure out what mess they'd just meddled in. "All right, team," Vale said, getting their attention. "Let's have a chat about what the hell we just survived." "Survived being a strong word," Carr replied, rubbing a fresh bruise on his arm from their zero-gravity escapade. "But I'm sure there's a silver lining somewhere in this disaster." "If by silver lining you mean not being space dust, then yeah, there's that," Lyra chimed in, ever the optimist. Her handheld scanner was still in her grip, flickering with a display of alien gibberish. "So, about that simulation," Trix said, swiveling his chair to face the group. "What's the deal? Besides trying to kill us with terrible design choices." Lyra squinted at her scanner. "From what I gathered, it's not just some virtual amusement park," she started, her tone taking on a more serious note. "It's more like a containment system." "Containment for what?" Arla asked, her skepticism palpable. "Us, or more generally, any spacefaring races that get too big for their boots," Lyra explained, eyeing the crew's various expressions of disbelief. "Great," Carr said, throwing his hands up. "Not only are we lost in space, but we're also part of some intergalactic zoo exhibit." "Yeah, but you gotta admit," Vale added, "we're the most unruly exhibit they've had in a while. Lots of broken glass and angry zookeepers." Trix chuckled. "I'd pay to see their faces when they realized humans meant chaos incarnate." Vale leaned forward, eyes glinting with mischief. "And now we've got a choice. We can cut and run, try to get as far away from this mess as possible, or we can hit him where it hurts," Arla finished, a fierce grin spreading on her face. "They won't see it coming." "You sure about that?" Carr asked, eyebrow raised. "They probably have backup systems out the wazoo." Let him, Vale replied, shrugging. We've dealt with worse odds. We have, Arla retorted, earning a laugh from the group. Details, Vale said, waving off her concern. Point is, we've got intel now. We know what they're up to. Lyra glanced at the scanner again. I can try to dig deeper, but it'll take some time. The data's encrypted tighter than a miser's wallet. Guess that gives us a little breathing room, Vale said. In the meantime, let's see what other tricks they've got up their sleeves. The ironclad sensors began to beep ominously as if on cue. Trix spun back to the controls, his expression shifting from joking to serious in a heartbeat. Cap, we've got company. Vale straightened. Already. Didn't know they were such clingy hosts. Yeah, well, turns out they didn't appreciate our DIY demolition, Trix said, his fingers dancing across the controls. I'm picking up multiple signatures, looks like an armada. An armada, Arla repeated dryly. Because why send one ship when you can send a fleet? Vale sighed. Time for Plan B. What's Plan B? Carr asked, prepping his tool-turned weapon. Improvisation, of course, Vale replied, grinning. And if that fails, run like hell. The crew snapped into action, navigating the ironclad with a mix of desperation and bravado. The monitors showed the alien ships closing in fast, their sleek designs a sharp contrast to the ironclad's battered hull. Here they come, Trix warned, looking at Vale for orders. Vale's smirk didn't waver. All right, let's give him a warm welcome. The first alien ships opened fire, green energy bolts streaking towards them. Trix maneuvered the ironclad with the grace of a drunken ballerina, dodging blasts with a series of gut-twisting spins and dips that had the crew clinging to their seats. Who taught you to fly? A crash test dummy, Carr shouted, holding onto a railing for dear life. Complaints can be filed after we survive, Trix shot back, pulling the ship into another tight turn. Vale was at the communications console, flipping switches and punching buttons with intent. Let's see how they like a little feedback, he said, rerouting power to the ship's weapons. The ironclad's turrets spit plasma, hitting the closest alien ship with a satisfying explosion that sent debris flying. The crew cheered, but the celebration was short-lived as more ships closed in. Vale, we can't keep this up forever, Arla warned, eyeing the power levels. Just need to hold them off long enough for Lyra to crack that encryption, Vale replied, keeping his gaze on the screen. Lyra was absorbed in her work, completely in her element despite the chaos around her. She muttered to herself as her fingers flew across the scanner, each keystroke a step closer to unlocking the secrets they needed. We might not have much time, Trix cautioned, pulling the ship into another evasive maneuver. Their aim's getting better. Vale gripped the console, his mind racing. Just keep us in one piece. We've got this. The alien ships continued their assault, relentless in their pursuit. The ironclad shuddered under the onslaught, the hull creaking ominously as if voicing its own concerns about the situation. Any day now, Lyra, Carr said, casting a nervous glance her way. I'm working as fast as I can, she replied, her focus unwavering. You tried deciphering an alien language while getting shot at. Arla fired back with the ironclad's weapons, each hit a testament to their refusal to go down without a fight. How much longer can we keep this up? Long enough, Vale said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince himself or the crew. Just then, Lyra let out a triumphant cry. Got it. I've cracked their code. The crew's spirits lifted, even as the situation remained dire. Vale turned to Lyra, eager for good news. What do we know? Lyra quickly explained, her voice clear despite the chaos. The simulation was designed to stifle technological advancement, to keep species from reaching their full potential. So they're control freaks, Arla said, understanding dawning. They're afraid of competition. Exactly, Lyra said, nodding. And I just found a way to disrupt their whole system. Vale's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of defiance. Let's turn their own toys against them, then. As Lyra began implementing her plan, the ironclad danced through the battlefield, the crew working in concert with the kind of silent communication that only came from facing death together. Each maneuver, each strike was a testament to their shared resolve. "Got a new plan, Cap?" Trix asked, keeping the ship steady amidst the chaos. "Yeah," Vale said, his smirk as sharp as a knife. "We're going to give them a taste of their own medicine." Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, her focus absolute. The simulation systems were complex, but she dismantled them with a ruthless efficiency that would have impressed the most cynical of hackers. The alien armada continued its assault, unaware of the chaos brewing within their own systems. Vale watched the screens, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Almost there," Lyra said, her voice tense but confident. The ironclad held fast, its crew driven by a shared determination to end this once and for all. Their grit and gallows humor had brought them this far, and it would see them through to the end. Finally, Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "It's done. Their systems are compromised." Vale nodded, his smirk replaced by a fierce grin. "Now, let's make sure they know it." "With pleasure," Arla replied, unleashing a final volley of fire that hit the alien ships with devastating precision. The alien armada faltered, their systems unraveling under the weight of their own technology turned against them. The ironclad surged forward, breaking through the once impenetrable blockade with newfound freedom. As the alien ships retreated, their formation broken, Vale allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd done it. They'd beaten the odds once again. The crew let out a collective breath, the tension slowly easing away as they realized they were alive, still together, still fighting. "Nice work, everyone," Vale said, his voice filled with genuine pride. "Let's get out of here before they change their minds." Trix plotted a course away from the battlefield, the stars stretching out before them like a promise of freedom. The ironclad picked up speed, leaving the chaos behind. "Think they'll be back?" Carr asked, settling into his seat. "Probably," Vale admitted. "But we'll be ready for them." "Here's hoping their next plan doesn't involve more jump puzzles," Arla added, a hint of amusement in her voice. Lyra put down her scanner, finally allowing herself to relax. "I think we've earned a drink after that." "I'll drink to that," Trix agreed, his hands steady on the controls now that the danger had passed. As the ironclad sailed through space, the crew allowed themselves a rare moment of peace. They were a small band of misfits in a vast universe, but they'd proven they could hold their own against the most daunting of foes. Vale sat back, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. They'd made it through another impossible situation, and they'd done it together. Whatever the universe threw their way next, they'd face it head-on, with the cleverness and irreverence that defined them. For now they were free, and that was enough. "Set a course for anywhere but here," Vale said, his smirk returning. "The universe won't know what hit it." The crew laughed, their spirits high despite the challenges ahead. The ironclad zipped away into the unknown, leaving a trail of chaos and defiance in its wake. In the musty, dinged-up cockpit of the ironclad, things were about as grim as a funeral in a rainstorm, minus the umbrellas and the weepy-eyed mourners. The alien armada, having taken the brunt of their initial assault like a particularly stubborn rash, weren't backing down. Instead, they seemed to have multiplied. Captain Vale leaned against the smudged console, his expression hovering somewhere between bemused and mildly annoyed, as if he'd just stepped in something unpleasant but wasn't entirely surprised. "Is there a plan C?" Carr piped up from his seat, nursing a bruise that was now a mottled purple. "I mean, improvising is great and all, but I'd rather not improvise my way into a coffin." Vale glanced over, his smirk refusing to quit. "Plan C is just Plan B with more explosions and less dignity." "Ah, dignity. Long gone, much like my optimism," Arla chipped in, her fingers deftly dancing over the weapon controls as another alien barrage rattled the ironclad. "We should have brought flowers for our funeral." Lyra, hunched over her handheld scanner like a modern-day soothsayer divining data from the digital ether, shot a look over her shoulder. "At least we're getting good at this whole last stand thing. Practice makes perfect, right?" Trix snorted as he swiveled in his seat, eyes flicking between screens. In that case, we should be perfect by now. Too bad the universe didn't send a medal or something. As the ironclad shook under another impact, Vale pushed off from the console, his expression shifting to something more serious. Listen up. I know things look about as promising as a lead balloon, but we've been here before. We play our cards right, we'll get out of this mess. A chorus of incredulous laughter erupted from the crew. Dark humor, after all, was their most reliable coping mechanism, next to sarcasm and alcohol. Sure, Cap, Trix said, his grin as dry as a Martian vista. Right after we develop a love for zero-G ballet. Vale ignored him, turning his attention to the central display, which was currently showing more red dots than a teen with a complexion issue. Lyra, any luck with those systems? We need a miracle, and we need it 5 minutes ago. Well, if I could just get this encryption to cooperate, Lyra muttered, poking and prodding at her device like it had personally offended her. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark with oven mitts on. Good news, though, she added with a gleam in her eye. Once I'm in, I'm gonna give these aliens one hell of a hangover. Music to my ears, Vale said, nodding as he turned to the rest of the crew. All right, folks, let's show these interstellar assholes what humans are made of. Car, Arla, prep for a counterattack. Trix, keep this rust bucket flying. We've got a dance to finish. The crew set about their tasks with a grim determination, their camaraderie forged in the fires of countless close calls and desperate moves. The ironclad might be a clunker, but it was their clunker, and it had a nasty habit of surviving against all odds, much like its crew. As the alien ships closed in, Vale found himself recalling the old adage, "What doesn't kill you makes you stranger." Or was it stronger? Either way, they were definitely the former. Maybe the latter too if they played their cards right. Here they come again, Trix announced, his voice rich with a mixture of excitement and exasperation. These guys really don't know when to quit, do they? Persistence is a virtue, Arla quipped, her fingers tapping commands into the weapon's console. Too bad stubbornness is a death sentence. Remind me to add diplomatic envoy to our list of future careers, Carr said, bracing himself as the ship lurched under another volley. Because clearly, we're doing such a good job of making friends. Vale chuckled, even as the ironclad shuddered ominously. Friendship's overrated. Now, let's see if we can't make them regret this little encounter. The firefight that ensued was nothing short of chaotic. The ironclad twisted and turned, dodging laser beams and plasma bolts with the grace of a very upset drunken giraffe. Vale's orders were barked out with the kind of authority that suggested he either had a plan or was excellent at pretending he did. The crew responded in kind, throwing everything but the galley sink at their alien adversaries. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and triumphant. I've got it. I'm in their systems. Time to make them dance to our tune. Do it, Vale ordered, his grin feral as the odds began to shift ever so slightly in their favor. Let's show them the downside to picking a fight with chaos incarnate. As Lyra worked her magic, the alien ships suddenly faltered, their formations breaking apart like a poorly organized parade. The ironclad surged forward, exploiting the chaos with a ruthless efficiency that was practically their calling card. Looks like their shiny toys are finally breaking, Trix observed, weaving through the disarray with the kind of skill that belied his earlier antics. Guess they don't make 'em like they used to. We should send them a strongly worded letter about their quality control, Arla suggested, unleashing a barrage of fire that connected with satisfying accuracy. The tide had turned, but victory was far from assured. Vale knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The universe had a nasty habit of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expected it. Brace yourselves, he called out as the ironclad punched through the enemy lines, a battered underdog in a sea of sleek, deadly opponents. We're not out of the woods yet. Never are, Carr muttered, clutching the railing as the ship executed another gut-twisting maneuver. But damn if it isn't a hell of a ride. The alien ships, once an unstoppable force, were now a disorganized mess, caught off guard by the ruthless efficiency of Lyra's sabotage. The ironclad took full advantage of the chaos, striking with the kind of precision that would have made any military strategist proud. "How's that for improvisation?" Vale shouted over the din, his voice fierce with determination and defiance. "Improvising my way to an early grave," Trix muttered, but there was no mistaking the exhilaration in his eyes as he piloted the ship with reckless abandon. Lyra, her task complete, allowed herself a moment's respite, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline rush. "I hope they're enjoying the fireworks." Arla let out a bark of laughter, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of battle. "If they aren't, they've got no taste." The ironclad continued its assault, every shot a reminder of the crew's tenacity and refusal to back down. They'd been backed into a corner, but they'd come out swinging, and the aliens were paying the price. Finally, as the last of the alien ships retreated, licking their wounds and reconsidering their life choices, Vale allowed himself to relax just a fraction. They'd pulled off the impossible once again, a testament to their resilience and unity in the face of overwhelming odds. "Guess we showed them, huh?" Carr said, his grin wide despite the exhaustion etched on his features. "Wouldn't call it a show," Vale replied, his voice rough with relief and lingering tension. "More like a poorly rehearsed circus act." Trix snorted, wiping sweat from his brow as he adjusted their course. "And we're the clowns." "Hey, clowns get the last laugh," Lyra pointed out, leaning back in her seat, her exhaustion mirrored by the rest of the crew. "That they do," Vale agreed, his smirk returning as he surveyed the battered but victorious crew. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." The ironclad sailed on, leaving behind the wreckage of their latest skirmish, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they'd survived another day. For now they were free, and the universe in all its chaotic glory was once again theirs to navigate. "Next stop, anywhere but here," Vale said, his voice rich with possibility and the promise of more adventures. "Let's see what kind of trouble we can find next." The crew laughed, their camaraderie as unyielding as the iron hull of their ship. Together they were unstoppable, a force to be reckoned with, and the universe was theirs for the taking. As the ironclad streaked away into the stars, leaving behind a trail of chaos and defiance, Vale couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it head-on, with the kind of irreverence and boldness that had brought them this far. For now they were alive, they were together, and they were ready for whatever the cosmos threw their way next. And that, in the grand scheme of things, was more than enough. The ironclad cruised through the aftermath of their chaotic skirmish, leaving a debris field of confused, wounded aliens in its wake. Captain Vale leaned back in his chair, the comforting hum of the ship's engines vibrating through him like a lullaby from a slightly deranged mother. "Well, that was a fun warm-up," Vale said, his smirk almost audible. "Let's see if we can turn that into something that'll really piss these aliens off. Because that's always the best strategy," Trix chimed in, rolling his eyes so hard they nearly did a full 360. "I mean, why settle for just annoying them when we can make it personal?" Vale chuckled. "Exactly. We're about to take the chaos up a notch." "Lyra, you know what to do." Lyra, still high on the adrenaline of her earlier victory, nodded with a grin that would make the devil wary. "Oh, I've got a bag full of tricks that's just begging to be let out." "Let's make it a show they won't forget," Vale said, clapping his hands as if he were a ringmaster about to unleash the circus from hell. As she worked her magic, Lyra's fingers danced over her scanner with the precision of a deranged pianist. The display before her flickered and morphed, lines of alien code bending to her will. It was more than just hacking. It was a full-scale assault on the simulation's nervous system. "Almost there," she muttered. "Gonna make 'em wish they'd never turned this thing on." "While you're at it, see if you can't send them a playlist," Carr suggested. "Something heavy on the human classics. Maybe a little Staying Alive." The ironclad shuddered as the alien simulation responded with a volley of shots, each one missing by a hair's breadth, like a blindfolded sniper with a vendetta. Arla, locked into her weapon controls like a gunslinging goddess of vengeance, answered the fire with a barrage of her own. "Looks like they are still mad," Trix observed, swerving to avoid a particularly ambitious laser. "I'm just shocked they haven't sent us a cease and desist yet." "Maybe they're getting around to it," Vale replied. "But let's make sure they're too busy to write it." As Lyra's assault took hold, the simulation began to falter, its pristine order unraveling into chaos. The alien ships flickered, their sleek forms shimmering like mirages in a desert heat. For a moment, it was as if they were seeing double or triple or maybe just seeing things that would make a sober man question his sobriety. "Glitches are starting," Lyra announced, her voice ripe with satisfaction. "Their systems can't take the pressure. It's like trying to run a marathon with a hangover." "Good," Vale said. "Let's turn it into a full-blown migraine." The ironclad wove through the simulation's defenses, exploiting every glitch, every error, like a pirate rifling through a treasure chest. The alien ships struggled to maintain formation, their movements erratic and unpredictable. "This is the most fun I've had in ages," Arla said, unleashing a salvo that sent another alien ship spiraling out of control. "It's like they've forgotten how to fly. Or they never knew in the first place," Trix quipped. "Amateurs." The chaos spread like a virus, infecting the simulation with the kind of rampant disorder that could only be described as pure, unadulterated human creativity. Vale watched as the once formidable defense grid began to collapse under the onslaught, each glitch an echo of their defiance. "Looks like we've got their attention," Vale said, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Now let's see if we can't keep it." "Should I give them a fireworks show?" Carr asked, barely containing his enthusiasm. "By all means, light it up," Vale replied. "Let's make sure they remember this dance." Carr grinned and went to work, launching a series of maneuvers that would have made a stunt pilot proud. The ironclad twisted and turned, leaving trails of light and explosions in its wake. It was a spectacle worthy of the finest interstellar carnivals. "Beautiful," Lyra murmured, watching the chaos unfold on her screen. "It's like watching a masterpiece being painted in real time." "Or a disaster movie," Trix added. "Depending on your perspective." The glitches continued to spread, each one a tiny death knell for the simulation's control. The aliens, once confident and composed, were now in a state of frenzied panic, their systems struggling to keep pace with the madness raining down upon them. "How are we holding up?" Vale asked, his gaze sweeping the cockpit. "Ship's holding together," Trix reported, a touch of pride in his voice. "Though I wouldn't recommend hitting any more walls today." "Noted," Vale replied. "Let's focus on keeping them on the back foot." The ironclad's assault was relentless, the crew working in perfect sync despite the madness surrounding them. They were a well-oiled machine, each member playing their part to perfection. It was a symphony of chaos, and they were the maestros. "More glitches incoming," Lyra announced. "Their systems are overloaded. We've got them on the ropes." "Good," Vale said. "Let's make sure they stay there." The alien ships faltered, their once lethal precision reduced to flailing attempts at defense. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outwitted by a crew that thrived on chaos. "Looks like they are about to throw in the towel," Arla observed, her fingers a blur as she unleashed another volley. "Guess they didn't expect a bunch of misfits to give them such a hard time." "Misfits or not, we've got them running scared," Carr said, his grin wide enough to split his face. "And that's something worth celebrating." Vale watched as the alien ships began to retreat, their once formidable presence reduced to a disorganized rabble. They were beaten, their pride shattered by the relentless onslaught of human ingenuity. "Well, that was fun," Trix said, settling back into his seat. "We should do it again sometime." "Preferably not too soon," Lyra replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "I'm not sure my nerves can take another round just yet." Vale chuckled, his gaze sweeping the battered but victorious crew. "You all did good. Now let's get out of here before they decide to get their act together." The ironclad turned its sights on the open expanse of space, leaving behind the wreckage of their latest victory. They'd done the impossible, once again proving that chaos, when wielded correctly, was a weapon to be feared. "Where to now, Cap?" Arla asked, her voice equal parts excitement and anticipation. "Anywhere but here," Vale replied, his smirk as irrepressible as ever. "We've still got a lot of universe left to annoy." As the ironclad slipped away into the stars, Vale couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his crew. They'd faced down impossible odds and come out on top, a testament to their tenacity and refusal to back down. "Think they'll remember us?" Carr asked, his voice laced with amusement. "Oh, they'll remember," Vale said. "And they'll be telling stories about this encounter for generations." The crew laughed, their camaraderie as unyielding as the iron hull of their ship. Together they were unstoppable, a force to be reckoned with, and the universe was theirs for the taking. As the ironclad sailed on, leaving behind a trail of chaos and defiance, Vale couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it head-on, with the kind of irreverence and boldness that had brought them this far. For now, they were alive, they were together, and they were ready for whatever the cosmos threw their way next. And that, in the grand scheme of things, was more than enough. The ironclad drifted lazily through the debris field, the remnants of the alien simulation hub scattered like the aftermath of a particularly intense bar fight. Captain Vale leaned back in his chair, the hum of the engines a comforting reminder that, for once, they weren't in immediate peril. Not that he didn't have a soft spot for peril and its exciting cousin, chaos. "Well, that was a real party," Vale said, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. "Shame we had to leave before dessert." "I think we ate enough," Trix retorted, his fingers dancing over the control panel, making sure none of the alien leftovers decided to bite back. "And by 8, I mean we turned their simulation into a buffet of disaster." Lyra snorted, still riding the high of their recent escapade. "Can't say I've ever seen an alien rave go quite like that. A regular rock and roll breakdown. More like a rock and roll meltdown," Arla chimed in, her eyes still glued to the weapons panel, fingers itching for another round. "Those glitches were the cherry on top." Vale watched the display, a twisted landscape of flickering alien imagery slowly fading into nothingness. "Lyra, any idea how long before their systems completely give up the ghost?" "Hard to tell," she replied, tapping away at her scanner like it owed her money. "They built this thing to last, but I'm guessing they never planned for a crew of humans to go full demolition derby on it." "Well, that's their mistake," Carr said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of relaxed mischief. "They should have known better than to invite us to the party if they didn't want us to trash the place." "You'd think they'd have learned by now," Trix added, "seeing as humans aren't exactly known for playing by the rules." "Rules are optional," Vale said, "especially when you're this good at breaking them." As if on cue, the simulation hub shuddered violently, the last vestiges of its control system straining under the pressure of Lyra's digital siege. The holographic maze that once dominated the main display flickered, its intricate patterns collapsing into a chaotic jumble of light and noise. "Looks like they are finally giving up," Lyra said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "The whole thing's folding faster than a cheap poker hand." The ship rocked gently as the simulation began to disintegrate around them, fragments of alien architecture dissolving into digital dust. It was a sight to behold, like watching a house of cards collapse with all the grace and poise of a drunken giraffe. "Beautiful," Vale murmured, eyes alight with that dangerous mixture of glee and recklessness. "I do love a good show. Too bad we won't get any fan mail from the aliens," Arla said, a half-smile playing on her lips. "I'm sure they'd have a few choice words, probably unprintable," Trix remarked. "Not that it matters. They're probably too busy picking up the pieces." As the chaos unfolded, the alien ships hovering at the edge of the simulation hesitated, their sleek forms casting long shadows against the dying light. For a moment, it seemed they might press the attack, but then, one by one, they turned and began to retreat, slinking away like whipped dogs. "Guess they've had enough," Carr noted, his voice laced with amusement. Can't say I blame them. Smart move, Vale agreed, watching the retreat with satisfaction. Let's face it, when you're up against a bunch of unpredictable maniacs, discretion is the better part of valor. The aliens' withdrawal left the ironclad alone amidst the wreckage, the once formidable simulation reduced to a digital ghost town. The planetary shield wall, that towering bulwark of alien ingenuity, began to pulse erratically, its structural integrity compromised. "Lyra, what's the status on the shield wall?" Vale asked, his gaze fixed on the flickering barrier. "It's gonna blow," she replied, a devilish gleam in her eye. "Their systems are on the verge of a complete meltdown. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck." "Time to get clear then," Vale said, unfazed. "No sense sticking around for the grand finale." With a flick of his wrist, the ironclad's engines roared to life, propelling the ship away from the collapsing simulation hub at a speed that left even the stars looking a little winded. The crew watched as the shield wall buckled and cracked, its once impenetrable surface fracturing under the strain. "One hell of a fireworks show," Trix commented, eyes wide with awe as the wall imploded in a cascade of light and sound. "Hope they enjoyed it. Won't be forgetting it anytime soon," Arla said, her gaze unflinching as the spectacle unfolded. "They'll be picking up the pieces for years." As the shield wall crumbled, the alien simulation's true purpose was laid bare, a twisted menagerie of trapped species, long imprisoned and forgotten. The cosmos beyond seemed to hold its breath, 1,000 races released from their digital purgatory, set free by the reckless genius of humanity. "Well, that explains a lot," Lyra mused, watching the liberated ships begin to stir, their bewildered occupants struggling to comprehend their newfound freedom. "Didn't think we'd be playing the role of unlikely heroes today." "Heroes, us? Hardly," Vale said, shaking his head with a wry smile. "We're just the chaos they didn't see coming." Carr chuckled, folding his arms behind his head. "Chaos with a side of unexpected liberation. Guess we outdid ourselves." As the alien ships began to depart, each one a testament to a race that had once been lost to time, the ironclad held its course, sailing through the remnants of the simulation with the easy grace of a predator that had just been fed. The crew watched in silence, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. "Think they'll send us a thank-you card?" Trix asked, breaking the silence with a smirk. "More like a restraining order," Arla replied, her tone dry as dust. "We're probably on every wanted list from here to the next galaxy." "Let them try," Vale said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 victories. "We're used to being the bad guys." As the ironclad neared the edge of the debris field, the last vestiges of the simulation fading into memory, Vale allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd done the impossible, turned chaos into victory, and freed countless souls from their digital chains. "All right," Vale said, a note of finality in his voice. "Time to move on. We've done enough good deeds for one day." "Where to?" Lyra asked, her fingers already dancing over the navigation console. "Anywhere but here," Vale replied, his eyes fixed on the stars beyond. "We've still got a lot of universe left to annoy." As the ship surged into the void, the crew settled into their routine, each one savoring the thrill of their latest triumph. They were misfits, outcasts, but together they were unstoppable, a force of nature that defied explanation. "Think they'll come after us?" Carr asked, his voice filled with lazy curiosity. "They can try," Vale said, his smirk as irrepressible as ever. "But I doubt they'll want a repeat performance." "And if they do?" Trix asked, leaning back in his chair, the very picture of casual defiance. "Then we'll give them a show they'll never forget," Vale replied, his eyes alight with the promise of future escapades. "Because if there's one thing we're good at, it's making an impression." The crew laughed, their camaraderie as unyielding as the iron hull of their ship. Together they were unstoppable, a force to be reckoned with, and the universe was theirs for the taking. As the ironclad sailed on, leaving behind a trail of chaos and defiance, Vale couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Whatever lay ahead, They'd face it head-on, with the kind of irreverence and boldness that had brought them this far. For now, they were alive, they were together, and they were ready for whatever the cosmos threw their way next. And that, in the grand scheme of things, was more than enough. Captain Vale, sitting like a king on a throne of scrap metal, surveyed the chaotic scene on the ironclad's bridge, a contented smirk playing across his lips. They just turned a centuries-old alien prison into confetti and liberated a bunch of bewildered aliens who probably didn't know whether to thank them or turn tail and run. As far as first impressions went, it was probably up there with meeting your in-laws by crashing a stolen spaceship into their front garden. "Well, looks like we made quite the impression," Carr said, his voice dripping with amusement as he lounged in his chair like a cat in a sunbeam. "I mean, how often do you set a bunch of aliens free and get hailed as heroes for it?" "Not often," Vale replied, leaning back with a self-satisfied grin. "Good thing we didn't stick around for a speech. I hate speeches." Trix, hunched over the control panel like a miser over his gold, let out a snort. "Yeah, I can see it now. Dear aliens, you're free because we accidentally trashed the place." "Accidentally?" Lyra chimed in, eyebrows raised. "That was about as accidental as a bull in a china shop." Trix shrugged, eyes never leaving his screens. "Details." Arla, still itching to blow something up, looked disappointed. "We didn't even get to use half the weapons. I was all set for a real fireworks show." "Don't worry," Vale said, waving a hand dismissively. "There's bound to be more idiots out there willing to pick a fight." "Looking forward to it," Arla replied, her grin all teeth and bloodlust. "Who knew being the universe's unwanted heroes would be this fun?" "Fun's one word for it," Carr said, stretching like he was waking from a long nap. "But I'm pretty sure we've made some enemies too. Not everyone's gonna send us a fruit basket." "Enemies?" Vale laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender, more like fans with poor taste. Lyra peered up from her scanner, an expression of mock concern on her face. "You think they'll start a club, Galactic Anti-Human League?" "Probably," Vale said, chuckling. "But they'll need a good slogan. Maybe something like humans, because why not?" The crew laughed, a sound that echoed through the battered hull of the ironclad like music in an old tavern. Despite the chaos, the near-death experiences, and the fact that they literally had no idea where they were going next, this was home. A janky, half-baked, barely held-together home, but home nonetheless. "So, Captain," Lyra said, her eyes glinting with the promise of new adventures. "Where to next? Somewhere without homicidal aliens or sentient simulations. Not too picky, are you?" Vale shot back, the edge of a grin tugging at his lips. "Let's aim for somewhere that doesn't want us dead, for a change." Trix tapped a few buttons, his fingers dancing like spiders on a hot plate. "That narrows it down to, what, 3 places?" "4, Carr corrected, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "If you count the asteroid belt, though I hear the rocks have unionized." "Asteroids it is then," Vale declared, settling back in his chair. "I'm sure we can get on their good side with some well-placed flattery, or bribes," Arla suggested. "Everyone loves bribes." "Even rocks," Lyra added, not missing a beat. As the ironclad drifted through the void, graceful as a one-winged bird, Vale let himself ponder the sheer absurdity of it all. They were a band of misfits, a ragtag crew that had managed to survive the galaxy's most bizarre and dangerous corners, simply because they were too stubborn to die and too reckless to care. "Think about it," Vale said, breaking the silence and glancing around at his crew. "We just stumbled into a cosmic prison break, and now we're the unlikely saviors of a bunch of alien races." "Unlikely's one word for it," Trix said, his voice dry as the desert sands. "I'm thinking more unwanted." "Unwanted, unsung, unmanageable," Carr ticked off the adjectives on his fingers. "That's us in a nutshell." Vale chuckled, shaking his head. "The universe is a strange place, but I suppose that's what makes it worth exploring. The unknown, the chaos, it's what keeps us on our toes." Lyra looked up from her screen, a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Ever wonder what they think of us? I mean, we're not exactly the usual heroes." "Heroes, us?" Vale laughed again, a low, rumbling sound. We're more like the punchline to a joke no one quite gets. And yet here we are, Arla said, her voice full of satisfied defiance. Still flying, still causing trouble, and somehow still alive. Trix smirked, flicking a few switches with casual ease. Here's to being the universe's favorite chaos makers. Chaos with a side of unexpected liberation, Carr added, raising an imaginary glass in toast. As the ironclad sailed through the darkness, Vale let his thoughts drift to the future. They'd made a mark, however unintended, and the ripples of their actions would spread across the galaxy in ways they couldn't even begin to imagine. Whatever happens next, Vale said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 possible futures, we'll face it together. As always. Together, Lyra echoed, a soft smile playing on her lips. Until the wheels fall off, Trix added with a wink. Then we'll just steal a new set, Arla finished, her grin wide and wild. The ironclad surged forward into the unknown, a motley crew of dreamers and daredevils, ready to take on whatever came their way. They'd survived the impossible, defied the odds, and thumbed their noses at fate, and that, as far as they were concerned, was more than enough. Think we'll ever get recognized for something that doesn't involve explosions and mayhem? Carr asked idly, breaking the comfortable silence. Doubt it, Vale replied, his tone light with the kind of humor that comes from accepting your own reputation. But then who wants to be boring? Amen to that, Lyra said, settling back into her chair with a satisfied sigh. As the stars stretched out before them, a vast, glittering ocean of endless possibilities, the crew of the ironclad knew one thing for sure. The galaxy was a big place, full of adventure and danger and the occasional miracle, and they were more than ready to dive headfirst into all of it. To the next disaster, Vale said, raising an imaginary glass in salute. And the one after that, Trix added, following suit. Arla grinned, eyes bright with anticipation. Here's to pissing off the universe one day at a time. The crew laughed, a sound as ragged and real as the ship that carried them through the stars. They were misfits and outcasts, heroes and rogues, but together they were something more, something unstoppable. Onward then, Vale said, his voice a rough-edged promise. The galaxy's got a lot left to show us. And with that, the ironclad soared into the unknown, a beacon of irreverence and defiance, leaving behind a trail of laughter, chaos, and the kind of stories that would be told for generations to come. They were the crew of the ironclad, and this was only the beginning.